Good afternoon and welcome to our first webinar of the year on greenhouse energy management. Now, throughout the webinar, if you have questions, all you have to do is type them into the box, in the questions box located to the right of your screen. We'll address those questions at the end of the webinar. We'll also post a recording and email a link to the recording 24 hours after the webinar concludes. So today we have David Arkell, President and CEO of 360 Energy. David comes from an agricultural background, with his family involved in the food manufacturing business at the time. He completed his program at the University of Guelph in Management Economics for Agricultural Business, and since then he's worked extensively with greenhouse growers to help them manage their energy usage, costs, and CO2 impacts with customized solutions. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to David.
Well, thank you very much, Greta. Appreciate that introduction, and welcome to everyone for this next hour presentation. I look forward to review this with you and to any following questions that you might have afterwards. So let's just talk about, let's kick this off and make sure everyone is on the same page. We certainly know that energy is a significant cost to greenhouse growers, and certainly with the changing where growers are using lights now more frequently. There's certainly energy costs, the electrical costs have increased substantially, and there's more and more options that are available for customers. It's really challenging for customers to figure out what direction to go. So I'm hopeful in today's discussion that we'll be able to review sort of a process and thoughts that you might want to consider if you have some of those questions or issues concerning you. Just to give you a heads up about 360 Energy, effectively, we have been in business since 1995. We do work throughout North America. We work, as Greta suggested, we do work in the greenhouse industry and also in the manufacturing industry as well. And we do have quite a history of working with Greenhouse Canada. We were a key partner in the Energy Edge website, and we kicked off the Journey to Energy Excellence for greenhouses in 2012. So we are quite familiar with the greenhouse industry and some of the challenges and issues that you have. So certainly some of the material I'm covering, you may have seen parts of this in the past. So let me just explain effectively who 360 Energy is and really what we do that is unique or we believe required for greenhouses to actually help manage their energy costs. So there's two key components that we are ingredients towards energy management, and that is energy efficiency and energy procurement. And we don't like them to work in isolation on their own. They actually are integrated, and the key part that bridges between the energy efficiency and energy procurement is actually we collect data, analyze data, and report that back to the customer frequently. So when that's done, effectively we look at how customers can strategize on what they can do going forward and what processes they might want to put in place to find savings but also retain savings. So that's an area that we do on a continuous basis for customers. Let me set the stage on really what I think the problem we hear from most of our customers and things that you're trying to find ways to solve it. Certainly, we know energy is the second largest cost, and so that's certainly a concern and with growers and continues to be so. But there's a number of other factors that continually pop up, and when we talk to customers in the greenhouse industry and manufacturing, certainly these are things that keep them up at night, and they're trying to figure out how they go forward and how they make plans or how to operate in the future. So we have developed a process to actually help them, guide them through this, and it's really a plan. In fact, we help them develop a plan and help them execute that plan. As green operators view these factors and options, they are challenged with many questions and an increasing number of sources of information. So, should I put new lights up? Should I put a generator in? What's going to happen with carbon? Is that going to impact me next year? Or if with the election, how is that going to change? You know, should I buy a long-term contract? These are all these questions that growers tend to have, and it has a huge impact on their business. So they're looking for answers on what can be done and how it could be done. One thing we find is with growers, they tend to hear what their neighbors might do and think, I should do exactly the same thing. And hopefully you're going to hear today that maybe that isn't what you should be doing, that your situation is quite unique and should be treated differently. So let me just talk about you know, how you start this process before you start making any decisions. And so what we do before people start making decisions is we look at developing long-term plans for them. And to do that, you really need to understand what their current status is regarding energy. So we call it an energy baseline. And to know where you have to go or where you want to go, you need to know where your starting point is. So it's really essential that a customer establishes and identifies what their personal baseline is, and then figure out from there where they want to go. And so to do that, you actually have to gather information. Most of this information you currently already have. It's in natural gas, your natural gas bills, your electricity bills, water bills, CO2. This is all the information that you have that you need to make sure that you make available. And when you establish this baseline, not only do you know where you are, but it actually helps establish the cost avoidance that you achieve as you go forward. That's really essential because most people don't know when they make changes what net result it does for their operation. So that setting that baseline is a benchmark to use. Now, one thing I want to make sure, and I just talked briefly about it before, is that we find each customer is quite unique. You know, there's tomato growers, there's pepper growers, but every facility is slightly different from each other, even though they might be growing similar crops. And so we're encouraging customers that they think and look at their operation as unique and make sure they understand the unique qualities behind that. It's as I said before, most customers think they're just they may be just a tomato grower, but you have a key differences whether you're geographically, where you're located, that climate impacts, the way your building structure is set up, how your boiler is operating. Those all have huge impacts on how you operate and manage energy. So that's certainly something that I want to be clear is you are quite unique and it should be treated as such. I don't need to tell you the greenhouse is a pretty complex situation, and in the case of energy, greenhouse is impacted by many factors. Let me take you through sort of a high-level analysis. Here is a plant. Some people might think it looks like a particular plant of some origin, but here is a plant that we're looking at. And then effectively, when you look at the inputs, certainly sunshine plays a major factor in the growth of the plant, and not all that sunshine makes it into the greenhouse. It gets deflected out in some way. And then sometimes when the sunshine's not operating or not strong enough, you need boilers to supplement that, or possibly cogen. So these are your inputs that you have, and they're quite diverse and they're quite variable depending on where you are and how you operate. When we look at the actual outputs, it's quite dynamic as well, and we're just really just giving cursory reviews, but certainly you can see that you know, ventilation, infiltration, photosynthesis, transpiration. A lot of the customers we're working with aren't in soil now, and they're hydroponics. But your crop will be quite unique, and how you're set up is different. So there's so many variables that you need to be aware of. It can be sometimes daunting or challenging to figure out what to do and how to do it. And so that's an area that we really focus on. We look at all those variables. I'm going to ask, if you could, we're going to go to poll 2. And if I could, we're going to launch that. If you could please take a look at that poll and answer that. My intent is to share that information once people look at it. It's a great way for interaction, and so you, if you could look at that and fill out which one is appropriate for you. We'll give it some time just so people have a chance to fill that in, and then we'll share that with you. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll share that. Not everyone's had a chance to fill that in, but quite interesting to see the results for everyone. This is the poll. You'll see the results from people that are participating, the type of lighting requirements that are out there in the marketplace. So everyone can see that. Okay, so quite interesting. 33% is HBS, 50% is LED. 6% other lighting, and 11% no lighting. So substantially, people online are lighting, and it's quite interesting to see how LED is really starting to make headway in the greenhouse side. It's quite interesting. Okay, I'm going to move to our next slide now. So, in summary, when we are for greenhouse operators, you really want to maximize the use of solar energy. That's the number one area of where customers can try to reduce their energy costs per se. Reduce the energy used per unit production, so you want to get as much production throughput in that facility. And you want to also make sure that heat transfer is as efficient as possible, and you have the ability of using storage. Now, I know we've done quite a bit of work in working with the Netherlands, and certainly they seem to be much further ahead in many areas. But renewable in the greenhouse industry seems to be certainly an area that Europe is going towards, and I'm going to suggest that's probably something that we will be following to mitigate or reduce fossil fuels. So that will be an area to be focusing on as well. And the last item I want to suggest, and we'll talk quite a bit about this in this presentation, is to be tracking your actions and also assessing and analyzing your operation on an ongoing basis. You'll be amazed what type of results you get. Now, before I go forward, I just want to make it really clear, because of everyone's quite unique and where they're located, whether they're in BC or they're in Nova Scotia, the solution that you may want to look at will be quite different from others. So, and we recognize that will be the case. So be mindful, whatever you do, your solution should be customized to what your needs are and not follow exactly what somebody else does. That's really very important. Okay, so what I like to do is, before you consider change, essentially, you really need to have a handle on how you use energy in your operation. And when I say that, it's not only knowing your annual energy usage, but where is the energy consumed, when is it consumed, and to understand the fluctuations and what creates those fluctuations. The other thing which I find that customers or growers sometimes can be challenged because of time is really to understand the energy costs. Where are the markets, future markets going? Where's natural gas costs going? What's happening with electricity? Could they be in a demand response program? There's just so many options available, so it can be quite confusing for customers on what to do. But those are essentially, you have to have that information at your fingertips to actually figure out what is the best way to go forward. The other thing I want to discuss is you want to talk about what you want to achieve. So certainly you have to set goals and targets, and that should be impacted by what are your pain points in your organization. Are you trying to certainly reduce your energy costs? Is quality an issue? Is there labor issues that have to be considered in your decision making? And then maintenance costs. I think maintenance is a major impact to our organization. So, and it ties directly with energy. Energy usage has an impact on maintenance and the whole thing of sustainability. So think about what your goals and aspiration and targets are. That will be a key point as you go down this journey. Now, what I want to explain to you here is a process that we follow. And so what I want to, getting back to really understand your energy use, to do that, you've got to collect data, and that might be whether it's utility bills or hourly electrical profiles from the utility, gas consumption. That information has to be captured, and then it has to be integrated. That information has to be integrated in the whole organization. This actually is a picture of the Deuce family. People may be aware of the work that we've done with Deuce, but every month that information is shared, and they have a discussion every month on what it is and what it means to them and what they need to do going forward. And when they have that information, they can start prioritizing what equipment efficiency they may want to focus, and then the equipment efficiency impacts your supply arrangements. How are you going to procure energy? So it's a circular activity that needs to be done continuously. And if you find that you're doing that, you should achieve measurable results. That's the key point, is to ensure that you're achieving measurable results here. In our experience, there's been significant opportunities to drive energy efficiencies. And I would tell you, it's the fastest and the easiest is through operating best practices. Traditionally, most customers will look and think that they have to buy a piece of equipment to solve the problem. And don't get me wrong, there's reasons to do that, but to achieve sustainable results and quick and fast savings, I think if you start focusing on operational issues and understand how those operational issues are impacting your energy cost, you'll be surprised what you can capture in that process as far as savings. Now, here's an example of some recommended best practices. I've just come back from a NRCan conference, and certainly it was very clear, as we've been discussing since 2006, that operational ways or best practices are the best way to sustain savings over the long term. These items are a number of items. I've highlighted some in bold. So, I've stressed the idea of monitoring and setting targets. And when you do that and you have access to that information, I'll share with you in a real case study of what's been achieved. If there's maintenance issues, and make sure you you repair those correctly so that they actually, you'll find they'll create savings if it's done properly. Thermal screens, we have a customer that actually, they can tell if the screen was closed or not. In fact, this one story is they had this intern that came in that was supposed to shut the screens, and they didn't close them all the day, the one night, and the next morning, because they capture their data every day, they could tell that the screen wasn't closed by 5%, and it was addressed in their staff meeting the next day. So it's quite interesting. Temperature integration, certainly the ability of allowing the temperature to fluctuate in the difference in temperature in the evening can pay off dividends. So I could go through each line item. The point is, every one of these items are not capital costs. They're actually operational activity. And if you have process and procedures in place, using and looking at these best practices, you will find yourself will achieve savings. Now, here's some key points that I want to talk about. And certainly I want to discuss the idea of what you can optimize. I think, but before I get into that, I'd like to go to poll 3, if I could. So we're putting poll 3 up, and if you could please take a look at that and answer those questions to your understanding or your liking. Okay, I think we'll do is we'll close that off, and it's quite interesting to see the results there on how people are actually collecting and analyzing data. So certainly 43% recording cost elements from their monthly bill. 36 total cost and usage is recorded, so usage and cost, which is great to hear. 7% cost and usage, they do comparisons. That's a limited number of parties that participated in that, and then 14% they look at all the billing points. So I'm going to suggest to you that if the more proactive and comprehensive you have or you do using that data, you may find some significant results. Okay, I'm going to carry on with the presentation, and just to be clear here, as far as prioritizing operations, you certainly want to look at the existing structure and how it's maintained, the equipment, whether it's lighting, what is your preventive maintenance for relamping, pumps, how effective are the pumps operating, do they need, is there any maintenance required for them? As far as environmental controls and settings, I think I really encourage customers to look at the accuracy and how often do they calibrate their control systems. Now, to be clear, your control systems are really set up for production reasons. They're not actually set up for energy management purposes. And so sometimes people believe they're set up for strictly energy management. They're not. They're really to enhance your production. So, don't strictly rely on your control system if you think that's your form of energy management. So what I'd like to do now, this is actually a real live case study. And the customer that we have worked with since 2012, these are actually their consumption, kilowatt hour consumption for natural gas and electricity per square meter. And you can see in the top graph, to be clear, they're in more of a northern climate. They're not in sunny southern Ontario, but you can see the trending that has occurred since 2012 and 2017. Their actual numbers have there's a 17% improvement if you look at the combined efforts. And I would tell you, those savings had nothing to do with capital improvements. There was absolutely no capital improvements at all. This was all based on operational procedures and making sure they understood what they do and what they shouldn't do. And also information was reported and is constantly reported to them every month. We have a monthly meeting with them, and they have a chance to review what their usage is. We also talk about future markets. And so that's really critical. The one thing I want to make sure you understand in that top graph is their production was pretty well the same, and there was some mild fluctuation, but you would think by looking at those numbers that their production had dropped year after year. It hadn't. Actually, it's actually increased. So just because your energy usage goes down does not mean your production is going to be impacted. At the bottom of the graph, I wanted to share with you, not only, as I stressed, the understanding of how you use energy, but understanding of markets and future markets. This particular customer, I would say to you, when we first spoke to them, had a mindset that they were going to lock into a 5-year contract for electricity and for gas, and just using the dollar differences, nothing to do with what their production would have been had they not reduced it. There's over $1 million of savings that have been achieved over the last 5 years that goes directly into their pocket, and there was no capital cost involved. So if I'm stressing the value of best practices, it's just because we've seen significant success that can be achieved by organizations, and you can see this is sustained too. You got to stay at it. You just don't do it once and then you're done with it. It's a continual thought process. Okay, in 2000. Oh, sorry. Like any process for continuous improvement, a key component is to measure your results. So you have a baseline which you should develop, a KPI to measure and improve against. Sorry, I don't know why this is switching. So I apologize. So this just shows you, this was actually information that we gleaned when we first started this program, and this is information for 2004. It shows this is information that was captured from the Netherlands in 2004. So I'll give you a heads up here. The edible crops, obviously that's primarily vegetable, and the ornamental are flowers. Intensive are the heavy energy users for vegetables. And the extensive are actually the lighter usage, like lettuce and things of that nature. What I want to stress with this picture is to explain to you the best in class versus a typical customer on energy consumption. And so this is why we got excited and got heavily involved in the greenhouse industry. If you extrapolate this information and you use $7 a GJ, and you use 10 cents a kilowatt hour, effectively the difference between best in class and typical customer, there is a $20,000 a difference per acre, just going best in class. So what I want to convey to you is, to be in best in class, focus on the best practices. That will be sustainable, and you'll see the savings as I illustrated earlier before. Now things have changed, and this is 2018, and this is actually a picture of clients that we are dealing with. What's changed certainly is one greenhouse, they do not have lighting. That's primarily a heated load. They have pumps. That's on the greenhouse 1. And greenhouse 2 is dealing with lighting. Now, this particular client has HID lights, so it's not LEDs, but you can only imagine how much more their total energy cost is from someone who doesn't have a greenhouse or doesn't have lights. So certainly, I would say to you, when we're called in with customers, this is their biggest concern and interest on how to mitigate this going forward, and certainly there's lots of things that can be done, as I've said earlier, and what I'm going to talk about going forward. So, okay, what's next? What do I do besides best practices? What else is possibly involved to move the dial? So earlier, we reviewed the physics of how energy is obtained and used in a greenhouse, and introduced 5 key areas to optimize energy. Knowing what to optimize can be established by doing a heat balance study of your greenhouse. Remember, your greenhouse is quite unique, and I recognize this is a very detailed diagram that has lots of language in it. But what I want to convey to you is it's really very essential for a customer to understand those variables and how that impacts their operation. Because if you don't understand that, it's really your challenge to figure out what equipment changes you're going to have going forward. So what is a heat balance? Well, certainly what it does is it peels the onion layer just that much deeper. Instead of just looking at monthly utility bills, you're now getting into more data. You're getting into more information, whether it's hourly data, you're getting into daily data, you're getting into significant detail. And so a heat balance is something that will serve you well to help you figure out what capital projects you need to do. It's also really helpful, the heat balance is to be part of and to reinforce your baseline. And we talked about that earlier, but when you have more detail, it can confirm and figure out where your baseline is and where you can go going forward. Oh, sorry. So in your heat balance study, it may lead you to opportunities to take advantage of available incentives, and with the understanding of those changes mean to your total operation. So I know when we've talked to customers and we're looking at helping them identify lighting and what that lighting will do to their future costs, certainly you want to look at what efficient lighting is, LED, versus HID, and then also you want to look at what incentives they have. But to be clear, when you make one change, like changing your lighting, that also has implications to the rest of your operation. You can actually, it will impact the amount of gas you use, and you'll need to make sure your control systems are set up accordingly. And with the HID, when we're doing this heat balance study, we recognize it gives off a lot of heat, and so it should reduce your gas usage per se. Not that that's probably the most economical currently, the way some of you are charged for electricity, but certainly it does have an impact, and you want to be aware of that. Okay, so what I'm conveying here is that LED lighting is, I think, the future, and it seems to me a lot of people online are using LED. It's actually a great thing, but I just want to make sure when you make those changes, it has an impact on the whole operation. Don't think of it in isolation going forward. We're actually going to go to poll 4 if we could, and I'm going to launch that and ask if you could please fill out this survey. Okay, we're gonna, because you didn't have that many options, I think we can finish that pretty quickly. So as you know, it says, are you evaluating lighting solutions in the next 12 months? And it appears that the majority of you are, close to 60%. So good for you, and certainly that's gonna serve you well going forward, and could impact, I will say to you, it will impact your total operation, but you'll wanna also be mindful of what that does for your future electrical costs and how are you going to handle that. So similarly, the heat balance will help you also understand other options for energy inputs. This type of analysis, combined with your original understanding from your baseline, your goals, your energy plan for a continuous improvement, will help you optimize your time, resources, and investment. and you'll have the knowledge to make good decisions. So certainly, when we find sometimes customers, they'll rush into making some decisions on equipment, and we're encouraging you to sort of do more due diligence and not rush into that, because just so you properly understand when you make that equipment decision, what it will do and how it will go forward. So let's just talk about what you should do, and let's summarize this for you based on what we've discussed already. So I want to stress, you really want to have ongoing access to your energy usage and cost data. I would certainly start with utility billing information. There's a wealth of information on utility bills. And then as you are comfortable with that, you really need to have an understanding of your hourly profile. I know we have people from BC and Quebec, Manitoba, where you're in regulated marketplaces, but even how you use energy can impact your rate options that you have available to you. So understanding how you use energy and how you could use energy to impact your rate option would be really important. And the people that are in deregulated marketplaces like Ontario and Quebec, or sorry, Ontario and Alberta, that is invaluable to have this information, because you can figure out how your equipment's operating and if is it operating correctly, but also how should you procure energy and what equipment should be operating and what shouldn't be operating. The second component, which we've talked about, is establishing key performance indicators. This comes back to establishing your baseline, understanding where you are, and then figuring out where you want to go. And so that case study I showed you, where we were dealing with a customer from 2012 to 2017, and we're still dealing with them. To be clear, at the beginning when we did this baseline exercise, they had no idea where they wanted to go, because they didn't know what their starting point was. But once we went through this and we developed the plan, we started to develop a plan that could achieve savings year after year. And so, you know, you'll need those KPIs to actually figure out that and to measure your savings. Use the heat balance study if you're looking at purchasing equipment or looking at, I know utilities are encouraging new equipment or capital projects. Make sure that you have an understanding of what equipment actually makes sense for you, and how that will impact your operation. The other thing I find is where a lot of customers are in the position now of considering cogen versus the grid, and I'm going to suggest to you it's really, really important that you understand how to optimize your rate or rate options. We've been with a number of customers that they were about to buy a cogen, and then effectively after we shared with them what they could do and how they could reduce their rates, cogen at where they were in particular didn't make sense, and sometimes it does make sense. But you really, to make that decision, you need to have an understanding of not just your current pricing as far as electricity and natural gas. You have to have a good understanding of what that gas and electricity costs are going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. And I find a lot of suppliers may give information to come up with those calculations, but they're not in the business of looking at future markets. So you want to focus on that. And the last item I want to mention is there's a lot of industry trends and regulations that can and will impact you. So you want to be mindful of those in your decision making and not to take it lightly. So that's what you should do. Let's talk about what you shouldn't do. I'm going to say to you, like, and I started this at the beginning, don't buy a new piece of equipment because your neighbor bought the equipment. Buy the piece of equipment because it actually really makes sense for you in your operation to use this equipment, to operate this equipment, understand its capabilities and the risks associated with it. So don't purchase equipment just for the sake of it, because there's some incentive money made available to you. Really focus on your historical usage and also what impact with this new equipment it will have to your costs going forward. And make all decisions without, you really want to look at all alternative options. Don't just look at one option. When we're working with customers, we always like to bring to their attention a variety of options that may suit their risk management and is associated with it. And then as an ex-utility person myself, I would say to you, don't let incentives drive or prioritize your upgrades. You drive what makes sense for you. Don't let the incentive drive what equipment you should buy, because sometimes it may not be the thing that you should buy or do at all. So you really need to understand that. But at the same time, capitalize. If there is incentive money and you know what equipment there is, then capitalize on it for sure. The last slide that I want to bring to your attention is just to show you that with a continuous improvement mindset, with a plan, with an understanding of how you operate, with whether it's operational, best practices, or equipment. This is actually, it comes from the UK, but it's actually a study of what happened in the Netherlands. And so in the Netherlands, there was a lot of activity where a variety, they were quite open in the marketplace of how to make improvements. And you can see in the variety of crops, the improvements of energy use, whether it's natural gas and electricity, the changes that occurred over time. And so, you know, the case that I gave you is not a single example. This is an example of a country that actually embedded or took on this whole thought process, and they continue to get better. And so I'm encouraging you as a client to think that way, because it will serve you quite well. There's an incentive handout that you can certainly download. I know, and so the summary here is capitalize on incentives for sure, but make sure you drive what you want, and don't let the incentives drive what they want you to take. And so on the lower part, you can see it says handouts. You can click onto that and see how and what incentives are made available. Certainly, we'd be happy to, if you have any questions or comments regarding what incentives are available, we'd be happy to help you in any way. But certainly, that's the on the incentives. We're going to go to the last poll, poll 5, and I'm going to launch that for everyone to participate in. Okay, I think it's pretty clear that certainly the rebates from utilities will impact your purchasing decisions. So that's pretty loud and clear. And I'm glad to see that 12% of you are suggesting that it may be just for good business reasons that you're taking on. So that's the issue. Okay, Greta, I thank you for the opportunity to talk to the people online today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have at the time. So I'll hand it over to you, Greta.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That was great. We do have a few questions for you. So in terms of, if someone were to think about swapping out a piece of equipment for something higher efficiency, and you talked about understanding what the side effects might be, how else it might impact greenhouse energy use in a way that perhaps wasn't intended. Is there a way for the grower to estimate that, to somehow quantify the side effects, the possible side effects?
So I've got two answers for you. Certainly, I think you could turn to your supplier that's offering that piece of equipment and ask them that question. Sometimes the utilities in different jurisdictions will help out in that process. But the third answer is really this heat balance study that I was saying to you. If that was being done by someone, that would confirm and reinforce that possible impact on that equipment. So you've got some options available to you. Some will vary in the detail and the how comprehensive they are, but those are the options I think, Greta, that customers have available.
Okay. Another question is, what outcomes can someone expect from a heat balance study, and how could it help them?
Right. So this is assuming they've already done best practices, or they just want to get into the heat balance study right away. I'll answer your question assuming they've done best practices.
Yes.
So I would say to you on the heat balance study, it is really dependent on your baseline that you have, so it depends on how good or how bad they are from the start, quite frankly. And that's probably not the answer that he wanted to hear, but that's the reality of it, is that it really comes down to how good you are or how bad you are at the beginning. So that's the answer.
Okay. Another question was, which would be the best person on someone's greenhouse operation team to lead an energy management program?
That's a really good question. And whoever did that, thank you for asking me. Actually, it's our opinion that you should have a number of people like have a team and not have one person dedicated to be deemed the energy champion or the only person responsible. I think invariably, and this is somewhat traditional, it always defaults to one person because no one else wants to deal with it because it's too complex and confusing. But we have found when you can engage a number of people, so I can tell you our answer is we would have a grower, we would have the owner, we would have the accounting person, and perhaps someone in charge of the boiler. So we normally work on a team. The Deuce family, I can tell you what I just described, and they're a family. Probably one person fits in each capacity. So we would encourage you to think more than one and not rely on one person in particular.
Got it. Okay, I think we have time for one more. So for this grower, their energy costs have gone up a lot in the past 2 years, but their square footage and their production remain the same. What can they do about this?
So I think you start right from the beginning. You need to establish a baseline to take a look. They probably have a wealth of data that they have access to, like utility bills, capturing that electricity and natural gas costs and usage, and you can start pinpointing where there's perhaps areas of failure or opportunity. So certainly I would start with that. I can tell you a number of utilities are prepared and happy to help out in that side, but the other thing too I would say to you is when we're dealing with growers, sometimes there's a disconnect between energy usage and production. So the grower has responsibility for production and is not interested in energy usage. If we can get the grower to be involved and understand the value of energy usage, that you can still grow just as effective, if not more, with proper energy management, that would be worthwhile to do as well. So.
All right. Okay, well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you to David for sharing his advice on greenhouse energy management with us today. We'll also be posting a recording of the webinar and emailing a link to the recording 24 hours after the webinar concludes. If you guys have any further questions, be sure to send them over to us at greenhouse@annexweb.com. And please be sure to fill out the short survey at the end. Let us know what you thought of the webinar and what you'd like to see more of in the future. And last but not least, many thanks to Illumitex for their sponsorship of this webinar and making it happen today. So thank you to our audience for joining us today, and have a great weekend.
Thanks very much, Greta. Thank you, everyone.